Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope you got to say hello to a few new faces in the room anyway. We just thought that that's a way to start to get to know each other. And we will also have some more introductions when we have our small group discussions later on. And now we're going to talk about our theme today, and I'll introduce it briefly, which is place-based innovation. And this is the question, what is place-based innovation? This is the question we want to explore together with you during these first events in 2025. And we have today our three panelists who will be giving their unique perspectives on this topic, 10 to 15 minutes each. So we'll go over to them shortly, and then we'll be following it with some small group discussions, opening up what is place to you and what does place-based innovation mean. So for us at Shift Sweden, place-based innovation in the built environment and the mobility sector can refer to the development of and application of innovative solutions, of innovation that are specifically tailored to that place, the unique social, economic, environmental and cultural characteristics of that particular location or place. And this approach can emphasize how you leverage local assets and also addressing site-specific challenges, and particularly fostering collaboration amongst community stakeholders, policymakers and developers, for instance. And there are some specific tools that you can use, for example, pilots and living labs as prototypes. Another tool or method is placemaking, and it's these methods that we want to talk more about at the next community of learning as well. So what are the kind of tools that we use to develop place-based innovation? But the core objective is really, that's on the screen, and that's to generate inclusive, adaptable and resilient built environments by embedding local knowledge and identity into the innovation process rather than applying a one-size-fits-all solution. And why do we want to work with place-based innovation? If you take the next slide, Carl Martin, it's because place matters. It makes a difference to the solutions that we create. Place matters, the scale of the place matters, the geography matters, where is it in the world, what is the context, demography matters, who is there, who lives there, who contributes to making this a place. And place-based innovation can contribute to this future-proofing, we believe, for urban and mobility solutions, just by using those local strengths, fostering community participation, and also aligning with broader sustainability goals. And so local communities often have a stronger connection and a deeper understanding to their local places and to the local context. And that's really where the engagement and the democracy part of it comes into it. But also place-based innovation needs to address systematic change as well. So that becomes the next question we also want to discuss today. How do we do that? How do we go from something that is local, context-based and works for that place, but also leads to addressing systematic change that needs to happen if we're going to reach our mission in Shift Sweden, but a joint mission, I think, that is held by many of you here today. And ways of doing that, it could be fostering flexible governance or aligning local efforts with national or even international objectives, and also creating supportive frameworks for collaboration and how you scale up. But what we're really interested here today is that this is a journey with you. So we want to hear your views as panelists and participants on place and on place-based innovation. So I'm going to hand over now to our panelists. We won't be taking questions directly, but we will be discussing afterwards in the small group discussions. Carl Martin, you can stop sharing, and I think Professor Dan Hill will be sharing his own presentation. So Professor Dan Hill is a designer, an urbanist, an educator, and an experienced leader at the intersection of design, technology, and cities. He's currently the director of the School of Design at University of Melbourne. But many of us in the Swedish innovation field know Dan from when he worked at the Swedish government's innovation and research agency, Vinnova, which is one of the funders of Shift Sweden program. And he was really instrumental in the movement towards mission-based programs, such as Shift Sweden at that time. So we thought it'd be interesting to get your view here today, Dan. And as I understand, you'll be talking also about how innovation and place at the neighbourhood level can lead to work towards missions and addressing systematic change. So I'll hand over to you, Dan.
Okay, thank you. Let me just try and share my screen first. This worked before, so let's see if it works now. Emma, just let me know if you can see that in full screen, okay?
We can.
Yes, great, thank you. Thanks so much. And thanks for inviting me back to speak. It's always a pleasure to be back in the vicinity of Sweden and Europe. I'm speaking to you from London. And the first thing just to say is I'm going to go through this very quickly, so apologies, and particularly apologies for those who English isn't your native language, because I'm afraid I might speak quickly, but I'll try and speak clearly at least. But the reason I'm showing you these pictures of these books is that they have lots more words that you can look at later. So if you want to find anything else after this talk, those books which are broadly available, which end in the designing missions work from Vinnova that Emma just described, that's really the good place to start, actually. The others are a little bit more to do with the background to that kind of work. But I'll go through this quite quickly, if that's okay, and just talk about the two missions that we led on, really, I guess, and try to create in Sweden as exemplars or demonstrations of this kind of working. And a huge amount of this work was about dragging the sometimes abstract idea of mission-oriented innovation down to the ground and genuinely leading through place-based approaches, and yet having a systemic change across the whole country and across multiple systems. So you see immediately in this first, hopefully you're seeing the picture of the streets there in Stockholm, but in this first mission, we're trying to frame this idea of every street in Sweden being healthy, sustainable, and full of life. And that enables us to think about all of the streets in Sweden, which is one giant system. If you think about it, every single street in Sweden is possible to get to from every other street. So it's one big system. You could imagine holding the whole thing up. And yet in reality, of course, every street is highly local, to do with its local community, culture, place, geography, identity, all of those things. So immediately you have this tension between national scale retrofit and super local environment. But streets are very useful in that way. So really we started at this high kind of national scale, and we did things like what I call system in the room workshops. This one is in Stockholm as it happens, but we did we got to about 300 different organizations up and down the country. We did them everywhere from Umeå to Malmö and most points in between. And here you see, again, people from multiple sectors working together, from Voi on the right, Ericsson on the left, from university, from Stockholm Stad. And they're working together, drawing on possibilities for streets, as you know, what could you do with a street system? You can do all kinds of things, of course. It's not about traffic. In fact, streets are public spaces. They've become about traffic in the last 70 years, but for most of Sweden's lifetime, streets are about public space, and that's where they're going to return in the future once we get the majority of cars out of the way again. So they're beginning to unlock the possibility at that level. We did the same thing, with the Statsminister. That's the previous, I guess, maybe one or two back. I lose track now, but anyway, the Prime Minister on the left-hand side there, the Health Minister in the green top, and we're doing a similar workshop there. I think that was in Kalmar, actually. But in reality, of course, streets are on the ground. So then we found, working with Stockholm Stad, 4 prototype sites to start something going. And these are streets kind of in the middle or thereabouts, the middle of Stockholm or Södermalm. And you can see they're kind of dead. They're nice streets, but there's not many people on them. And so they're not super public in a way. And there's car parking there again. It's very typical to see streets like this. If you look at streets 100 years ago, they would be far more full of life than this. Nonetheless, all of these streets have schools on them, so we were then able to do the design workshop with school children and say to school kids, okay, you actually are the experts in the street. This is then super participative in this sense. They know far more about those streets, these ones, than say the transport planner at the city hall, with all due respect to the transport planner. The transport planner is looking at it in traffic contoret on GIS or a spreadsheet, whereas the 6-year-olds go to the street every single day, more or less, or at least 5 or 6 days a week. So they know the street, actually. So we let them decide what it's about. They become the designers. We facilitate that. These are the street designs that come out of that. Of course, they're super playful and full of creativity because kids are brilliant designers, actually. But they're also sensible. They have places for parents to sit because they know that they need that. So there are seats there as well as fake palm trees and things like that. Fake palm trees because it's Sweden. We can have real palm trees in Australia and other places. But anyway, swing sets, tables, gardens, all of those sort of things. Again, this is actually streets returning to public space, not parking lot. And what we're doing then is reframing with the community the idea of what the street is about. So the street is a complex system, but we've actually tried to reduce it in very simplistic ways. So on the left-hand side, you see that diagram. If you give the street to the traffic department, the answer is traffic. The clue is in the name, really. Traffic contoret produces traffic, or at least deals with it. If you give the street to gardeners, you get gardens, right? So it depends on who is in charge of this design. And by creating an environment in which multiple participants can come together, as you saw, mobility companies, prime ministers, school children, you open up the possibility of what the street can be about in a very direct way in terms of place-based innovation. So the street can produce social fabric, better air quality, biodiversity, reduced crime, increased retail, reduced flooding, whatever it might be. Multiple things, but only if those ideas or inputs are brought to the table, like on the right-hand side there. So then we wanted to scale across the whole country, though. We don't want to do one street. We want to do all of the streets, all 40,000 kilometers of street in Sweden. So then you need a modular kit of parts that can be adapted locally. And we worked with Lundberg Design and ArcDes, the National Center for Architecture and Design, and Utopia Architecta and a bunch of others on designing these modular systems which fit in parking spaces, because those are already scaled up and down the country, but they're all generic. And this enables them to become personalized, as in people can decide whether it's garden pots or bike parking spaces or seats or whatever. So then you see the kind of outcomes of that in Gothenburg and Stockholm and Helsingborg in this first instance. And of course, they're different places. And so every street is different. They have different people on them. This is the principle that the street designs the street. And therefore, the people need to design the street. There are all kinds of complex questions within this, but all entirely possible to locate at a street-based level in terms of participation. But you see, they're different because there are different people, again. Here it's spread to Umeå and numerous other cities, actually, in phase 2, and ultimately got to about 25 different Swedish cities, all engaged in different ways. And again, you see the kind of diversity of a system. This is both modular, systemic, adaptable, the same thing up and down the whole country. And yet each one of these streets is completely different to every other street. So there you go, 25 municipalities. It actually even spread to Normandy, just because why not? Because we open sourced it. So this is a way of spreading something online and having it spread across other places. I believe even in San Jose, there's a possibility that these things might be emerging. And I called this the 1-minute city in responses to Paris's 15-minute cities. So this is the city outside your front door, the one that you have the most intimate relationship with, that you could get involved in and you know something about, and you're a participant within. That got picked up in the New York Times and Bloomberg and numerous other places. You can see it called out on the right-hand side there, the Swedish plan, which meant that it began to spread globally. But again, it's super local about particular places at the same time. The results were very positive, about 73, 74% actually positive outcomes from these changes, 400% increase in activity on those streets. Volvo Cars were one of the partners. Those of you that are wondering why I was being mean about cars earlier, I genuinely do believe we need to probably reduce the number of cars in cities by at least 50%. Not possible otherwise because of material, never mind emissions. But Volvo Cars were in line with that, actually. This was their animation, their car sharing service at the time produced using the street moves kit, as you can see, as part of the description of how car sharing can reduce the number of cars in cities. And you see the quote from Håkan Samuelsson on the left-hand side there about reducing the number of cars. The value produced by all of that is across multiple different scales. So it's biodiversity, environment, maintenance, health, learning, all of these things. All of these white little bits of text are bits of research indicating the possible or probable outcomes of doing this kind of simple intervention. It's very, very powerful, very simple interventions, as you can see, but they begin to unlock innovation across the board. I'm nearly at the end now. So what we were doing there is building a platform, a local platform for asking questions in public, as in what do you need your street to be about? What would you like it to be about? And that means it's cutting across technical innovation, biodiversity, planning, participation, civic engagement, nature-based solutions, anything you can imagine, you can start playing out on this thing, which requires municipalities to keep on engaging with it. It's also why we build it out of wood, by the way, because wood doesn't last very long. And that's on purpose, because then after 2 years, you need to go back and re-engage and redesign it. Wood is then super adaptable, means that citizens can approach it. It's very powerful. From a strategy point of view, you have all of these layers underneath this project. So the green layer at the top is the most place-based, the most local, if you like, what I call the place layer in the street. And that's where you're engaging with people in Stockholm, Helsingborg, Umeå, Gothenburg, etc. Those blue layers underneath are scalable ones across the whole country. So the parking space law is a national law. So we had the transport agency on board with that, or the transport regulatory authority, rather, who could be part of the project as well to see if the parking space law needed to change. Same project for school food. I won't go into that in detail, but just to say that, this was then same kind of approach, but I'll skip through that. And then finally, the last bit of strategy is to say, what's going on here at these different scales? And this is something I've done subsequently, kind of writing this up. But on the top axis there of this triangle, you see 1 minute city, 15-minute city, 30-minute city, 60-minute city. You could go on, right? 120, 240, 12,000-minute city. And you have different systems at different scales. So bicycles and walking is possible at the 1 minute city, and that's something that can be highly participative in this case. This is mobility systems. Whereas a subway is obviously more like a 60-minute city scale. You don't build a subway at the scale of a street, you build it at the scale of a city, perhaps even a large city. And that's a representative model of decision-making. It's slower, more careful, it's more expensive. It's more about democratic responsibility and elective processes, things like that. Whereas at the smaller scale, the more direct scale, again, this kind of 1 to 15-minute city can be far more participative. Citizens can lead most of that work. They can afford it, or they can afford the time, potentially in some way. It's walkable. It's something they can be directly engaged in. Same thing with energy, because of things like microgrids. You can imagine the 1 minute city is rooftop solar systems, 15-minute city community microgrid. These are participative systems, increasingly affordable, manageable, adaptive, repairable. Whereas the regional grid, the hydroelectric power station or nuclear power station, that's a 60-minute, 120-minute scale system. Lasts for 50 years, super complex, but high-level governance and so on. We're doing a project in Melbourne, which is looking at biodiversity, distributed model, same thing again. Verge is something, or local biodiverse environments, local gardeners is something that local people can do. Don't necessarily need permission from the city, of course, to do that. They don't need funding necessarily. It depends on the situation. But you can imagine the city actually gets out of the way and lets people step forward into that space. We're looking up to the scale of the wetlands. At a 60-minute scale is something that you need an environmental protection agency or equivalent looking across that multiple scale system. So I think I'll leave it there and just wrap up just saying what I talked about there, to the key to place-based approach is really getting down to the ground, engagement, creating spaces for participation. So places can genuinely own systems. That's what participation means, really, not consultation, but actual ownership. It means a stewardship role from national government, regional government, municipal government, but also corporations, startups, etc., all working together with citizens. You start by getting something going. You don't look for permission, really. You don't need the evidence in advance, because there is no evidence in advance for things that haven't been done before. So you start by starting. It's about synthesis, making something happen that enables you to bring people together around it. So make the project in the street, and that's where you then redesign the street from. and absorb the learning back into the system. So that's about changing then the slower layers, if you like, those blue layers in my diagram of law and policy and finance, learning from what's happening on the ground. And that enables this balancing act between scaling and spreading, which enables place-based innovation to spread across the country rather than scaling. I think I will leave it there. I don't know if that was 10 minutes, but hope that was close enough.
Yes, very good. Good timekeeping there. Thanks so much, Dan. I know a lot of people have a lot of questions, so save those for our discussions together in the time that's coming afterwards. But this is really, really influential for us at Shift Sweden as well, how we think about a place-based approach and how it can lead to systematic change. So thank you for that perspective. And we hope to continue discussions.
Yeah.
And I'll now lend another perspective to place, and I'll introduce Dr. Marwa Al-Sabouni. And Marwa is an award-winning architect, an urban thinker, a writer, an international speaker, and she's based in Homs in Syria. And I was part of arranging a guest lecture with Marwa last year for Architects Without Borders, and I was really struck by the importance of talking about place in a rebuilding process. And her work really focuses on cross-studying elements of sociology, contextual and psychological analysis, and aesthetics. So what is the role of architecture as a society-making tool? Marwa is the author of 2 books, The Battle for Home and Building for Hope, which I recommend for you both. And she will be discussing today the price of places, so addressing the gap that exists between our aesthetic aspirations in the modern context, using the current challenges in Syria as an example. And we had some trouble with sharing the screen, so I think we're going to do that for you, right, Marwa?
Yeah, thank you so much, Emma, for the kind introduction, and thank you for having me. Thank you for everyone who's taking part and participating. I will ask Carl for sharing the slides. I will say next slide or something. So thank you for bearing with us. So the title of my talk is The Price of Place, and I will start from the local context of my city and my country, and leading to a wider perspective and wider scope globally. So after going through 14 years of war, during which over 60% of my city, Homs, was destroyed. You could share the slide, please. And over half of the population is displaced. A place where I live, where I call home, is both physically and socially stands in ruins. Next. Today, there is a new reality in Syria after the liberation from the Assad regime. The Syrian people is finally free from the authoritarian regime and its brutal oppression. However, we have a long way before we are truly free from his legacy, because the scars it had left are seen in all the areas of life, whether in the mass destroyed cities and villages. Next. In the abandoned lands and deserted fields. You can go through four slides now. In the collapsed economy and drained resources, in the falling systems, health, education, law, you name it. And above all, in the divided and deteriorated societies. In my first book, The Battle for Home, next, which I wrote from my home on the crossfire line, I argued for a connection between the architecture of place and civil conflicts by making a comparison between the architecture of the old Islamic towns, next, in Syria, and the modern extensions planned by the French occupation and later carried out by the regime, next. The book demonstrates how losing our sense of home and the attachments of belonging to a place leads to its destruction eventually. And the book also brings to the fore the perils of segregational urbanism, which mirrors itself in fragmented communities. The kind of urbanism we see in the European city also, and which was imposed on our cities in the region here by colonizers. Finally, I make a case for the role of the aesthetic sensitivity and an architecture of meaning in bringing people back to the place and back together, just as it was once possible in the old Islamic towns. In my second book, Building for Hope, next, I try to answer the question of how home can be built in times marred with problems and challenges, not only in places of war, but also in places of prosperity. I make the distinction between between our parts of the world, not on the basis of wealth, that can usually be the habit in the academia, but also on the basis of history, who live in the challenged parts of the world today find ourselves as so because of the legacy of colonization and its satellite regimes. Whereas the developed parts of the world have to wrestle with the fact that they were indeed once in history the colonizers. But today our world seems to be blighted with different shades of the same problems, making us in a way unified in the tragedies of dividedness, loneliness, and alienating places. In my analysis, I introduce 5 main existential fears in order to explain the psychological background of our aesthetic preferences. But I also use the concept of asabiya, which is the Arabic word for blood kinship, a concept that was studied by a Muslim scholar in the 14th century called Ibn Khaldun, who is considered the father of modern sociology. I use this concept in order to make the distinction between the different mode of settlement, whether urban, rural, or nomadic. I also make the case that modernity has deprived us from this variety and the risk of not only obliterating the variety of societies with a single brush of modern urbanization, but also the environment and the ecodiversity. Finally, I make clear distinction of what I mean by modern, which is not simply contemporary, but necessarily belonging to what I term in my second book as the factory system, which is the system created in the aftermath of the 2 world wars, leading to the current systems where production is the sole measurement of progress and where places on the whole have forbidding price tags. Please allow me today to demonstrate some of those ideas with a practical example from the reality we're facing today in Syria. The prospect of rebuilding in my city has been on hold, mainly for 3 reasons. First, the continuation of the Western sanctions on Syria and the process which could be at best described as a political blackmailing on the current government by some Western powers as a condition to be lifted. And the second is the ongoing Israeli targeting of different locations in Syria. And finally, the attempts to rekindling civil conflicts in Syria by many internal factions and the affiliations of foreign powers. What I wish to convey to you here is the level of uncertainty that is maintaining the status quo of incredible economic stagnation. Next, please. Rebuilding the mass destroyed areas is faced with legislation, with the legislative challenge of having different types of properties ownership belonging to many people who are either considered missing, dead, or simply migrating. This has put the new interim municipality of Homs in front of a great challenge: how to house the flooding back displaced people while the destruction of the city seems unmovable. Next. What remains of the city can be roughly divided into 3 categories. Next, well-off areas where housing types ranges between 3 to 4 floors blocks. You could go 3 slides here, to independent houses, all of which are buffered from each other and from the street by curtilages. Second is, next please, the poorer areas, also next. These are the poorer areas who are locally termed as popular areas. You can go 3 slides here, where different types of property ownership divide the neighborhoods into informalities and crowded and joint building blocks. And finally, you can go another one. Next, please. The Old Town, where a chaotic mix of historic courtyard buildings made of local material, which is the black basalt, next, and the new additions built with cement jarringly coexist. Next. For the past 2 months, the municipality has been receiving requests, mostly from the posh areas, to allow them to build an additional floor to their blocks, arguing that they will be an extension of housing for the growing family members. The public point of view is largely in favor of such proposal to allow an additional floor to be added across the city, except for the old part of the town. The main reason behind public eagerness is the imagined margin of profit they could make by extending their property. The municipality's main concern, on the other hand, is providing a chance to new housing being built against all odds that I've been describing above. I find the benign intentions of the municipality is refreshingly commendable after the fall of the regime. However, I find the approach hasty and full of risks, regardless of the many technical challenges to the proposition, whether structural or infrastructural also, and despite the additional layer of ugliness that would be added to the city and the further sabotaging of the quality of life through the improvision of public and the lack of resources and the crowdedness that would be created over the already existing crowdedness, the deepening of the gaps within the torn out urban fabric to my city also will be another challenge. But my main objection to the proposal, beyond all these reasons, is how it will awaken the inner real estate monster in people by turning their property into an investment. Not all of those who will be building are going to build due to immediate need of space. In fact, by looking at the source of the requests, namely the places where the provision is available, within also the limitation of the description in a war-torn country, give us a hint to the trajectory of the story. That is, a new apartment will be part of a real estate broking market, whereas one apartment is selling to a staggering 400,000 USD currently. Moreover, by viewing the proposal against the demographical challenges where many properties belong to people who are no longer here, and many others are apartments of various owners within the one residential block, this could mean an array of civil disagreements and disputes. In a room of about 15 people, I was the only voice who voted against the proposal, voices which wish to see the city, quote unquote, progressed as Dubai, come from the public as well as the government. Ironically, this is a view that they all share with the falling regime, whose legacy beyond all the already is known is new cities. Next, please. New cities are development projects within the capital of cement deserts over what was once an agricultural land. You can go now 2 slides, please. Showing the blocks. You will see the blocks here which were erected during the war, and this is the agricultural land that used to be the place where these new cities were built in Damascus. Project like this is going to be dedicated to the indulgence of the wealthy and the tourists. Ironically, this utilitarian perspective of architecture belongs to the factory system, where the ambition of man is to live even if it meant the death of the surroundings. Any rebuilding, in my view, rests on 3 main decisions. The first is the type of the urban and architectural planning, where the ideals of beauty, society, and even spirituality are knitted together to create order out of chaos and meaning out of mundanity. And the second is the type of economic activity around which human settlement revolves, and finally the type of systems of funding for action of construction. In the West, the scrutiny of the wrong type of planning, as we all here try to do, the one which has been exported to our regions in the name of modernization, has allowed for alternative idioms, which are trying to resist with great difficulty, let me say, the damages over the society and the environment. We in my country no longer have systems to support such growth and maturity in planning. However, the economic activity in the West, as well as the funding for construction, mainly relies on money trade, whereas interest is added to credit loans and management deals with assets and invisible shares. In our Muslim religion, money trade is prohibited. So by rejecting interest loans, our systems, although some of which are plighted with westernization and interest, allow for fairer trade, and exhibit resilience in the face of disasters. But because we lack vision and rigor in our planning, and you lack justice in your funding, housing has become inevitably a commodity across the world. And as a result, places continue to cost both of us our shared humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Marwa. Wow, I think we've all got so many new insights from the last 15 minutes, and I hope to take up these discussions in the group discussions that come, but particularly focusing on place and aesthetics and what is the idea of a commodity when we're talking about place as well is something we can discuss more. So thank you very much for your time here today. And then we're going to lead on to our last speaker. Lydia, you were going to introduce your one.
Yes, certainly I can do that. Thank you, Emma. And as just said, the last speaker of today will be Dr. Johan Stjärna, who is a lead scientist and scientific advisor on EU policy in JRC Seville in Joint Research Center. Johan, you're specialized in innovation policy and place-based economic development at university policy at EU, national and regional level. And you have a particular interest in innovation for the green and digital transition. Before joining the Joint Research Center in 2019, you worked for 15 years with R&I policy development at DG, the Directorate General, with research and innovation in Brussels. So in particular on the co-design of a mission-oriented EU and R&I policy and the policy for transformative innovation. And this was back between 2015 and 2019. You also co-wrote to the GRC research paper, The Square, putting place-based innovation policy for sustainability at the center of policymaking. So today, Dr. Johan Stjärna will be presenting innovation for place-based transformation at EU level, as well as your research paper. Welcome.
Many thanks, and it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to see the initiative and to be part of the community of learning, and also fantastic presentations. Many thanks. I think we have a lot of things in our heads already. I don't want to be too long. I just want to, I've been working in the field of innovation policy for a long time, and more or less after 2010 or something like that, we started to think of systemic innovation. Before we thought of innovation systems. Now then we shifted to systemic innovation. You change systems, and you have been very active on this role in Sweden, and we have learned a lot in the EU policy making from you. When we started to do this mission-oriented policy, we have 5 EU missions running now, and one of them is on cities. It's more focused on carbon neutrality, but it touches upon many of the dimensions you touch upon, and also what you say, Marwa, on financing then we have been reflecting. GRC is more like a reflections research institute that support policy making. So we have been working a lot on what is the link between places and place-based and the overall innovation policy, just that you take up here now. No? So we put together many experts in Europe together to reflect upon this. They worked on different policy issues and different papers, and one of them we put together in this book, The Square, which was inspired a little bit by the Swedish filmmaker, the film Square by Östlund, And I'll come back, but it's just to say that there are many people that contributing to this. The lead authors, apart from myself as editor, as being Professor Sote and Sylvia Schwarz-Serger, who is also known in Sweden, active. But many other good thinkers in geography, economics, sociology as well, and many others. I just wanted to share with you 3 messages for the discussion today. The first message, I think it comes out a little bit from also the previous presentations, that innovation and technology development, but innovation is a more complex thing, has a directionality, has a direction, and it has a reach. It has different consequences for different people, and you have touched upon that in the previous presentations as well. And I think this is important to keep in your mind also, because now in the US administration and many others, there is a kind of a strong culture now on technologies and technology development as an end in itself. And there are also those that advocate for innovation as an end in itself. And the starting point in mission-oriented policy and many others is that it has a directionality, and it can be good and bad. Innovation can be bad as well, and technologies can be bad as well, of course, we all know that. And he touched upon, so what we have focused a lot on is transformation of systems. Like you say, the mobility system is a system. You explained that marvelously, and it's interlinked with the built environment. The energy system is another system that is linked to this, and so on. And if you transform a whole system, that's a deep transformation. That's a radical, disruptive transformation. So it's not just AI and sexy technologies that are disruptive. They are, but also systemic transformations. And if you do that, you will also find resistance. So that's one starting point of our reflection that we have had. The second one is, and you touched upon that, it's the issue of, we call it granularity. And you can have different levels of granularity. If you have a very high level of granularity, you will come up with what Dan was hinting at. You can go down to the streets. You can even go the square. You can even have a small part of the street where you will have a trust relationship, like in the film. No? So you can have different levels of granularity, and I think that the most important thing is that, and you show that in the beginning as well here, you said that scale matters. You say demography matters, democracy, etc., but also scale. And the problem with having a very high level of granularity is that you may miss the scale dimension, and the scale is linked to economy of scale, and that is linked to business. So what we want as well is that there will be a connection between a mission-oriented approach and a possibility also for making new jobs and new firms starting up, etc. So what we have developed a little bit in the book of the Square is, how do you connect big changes, big transformation that are global, like the transformation in the mobility system, like the transformation in the car industry and so on, towards electrification and automation, digitalization, and on the other hand, what is happening on the street that you mentioned and elsewhere. And we have to take into consideration both. The same will go now for, if you start with now the new kind of transformative change, good or bad, mostly bad, is going towards defense and security now. And the reflection is how does that affect places, and what's the place-based dimension in that, and how will you connect that and use innovation to twist it towards a constructive development. The same will go for the the big energy system, the change in electrification and towards different kind of energy sources that are non-fossil, that's a global change. And big players in the world, they are competing in this. But it also have a very strong place-based dimension and impact. So places, in our view, is where all these global changes are being felt physically, where you can visualize, where you see them, and where people see them, and where you can try to shape them. But you also have to keep in mind that you can only do so much at local level. And that's the trick, and it's really a design trick and a conceptual trick that you need to get right. Also, that on the other part, you will never get these global changes to happen if you don't start to work on trust building, global mobilization, what you have discussed already in your previous presentations. So, and you can see that, we started to this reflection in the book we set up this policy in the European Union of the European Green Deal in 2019, and we had these missions already ongoing that were based on like in cities, etc. And how do you link them up? And we also have the more entrepreneurial initiatives of what's called smart specialization strategies, which get a lot of money from cohesion funds and others. So how do you connect these things? That was the basis of somehow. And so I think it's very important to keep in mind the energy change will not happen if people are not engaged and can be able to shape it at local level. But you also depend on the broader global. So that's the kind of second dimension, and we have developed in the book and also in other kind of things. The third one is that, and it links to your second workshop that you have foreseen. I saw the 25th of May or 5th of May, I don't remember, where you think of the tools. Now, these have consequences. If you go down to a mission-oriented policy, it has consequences for the governance. And if you want to link the top-down and bottom-up approach, as I mentioned, it has consequences. Who decides this? And how do you work together at the multi-level governance? How do you work together between who decides on the streets or on the buildings to reconstruct in homes and other places, and national level or even regional level, national level, and the international donors or international level or EU. How do you get this right? And that's new. We don't know how to do that. We don't know how to do it, and we need to get a hold of it. Otherwise, we will not get to a mission oriented. And at the same time, horizontally, if you want, the whole of governance approach. You talked about silos, breaking up silos between those that are in the planning session in a city and those are related to mobility. It goes the whole way. Those that are doing public procurement that works on regulation, they think it's a different world. You have to engage all these actors in the whole of government, and it's a lot about trust building, and that's why. So I stopped there, but it has a lot of these three messages we try to develop in the book, and we're also trying to work with it. There's no easy answer, but thanks again for the initiative. It's wonderful, and all the support that you would need, we are happy to provide from the GRC. Thanks a lot.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Johan Stjärna, for your presentation and for sharing your interesting reflections that we now can bring into the coming discussions that we have prepared for you. And thank you for sharing parts of your very inspiring and very important work. I will not get on to talk much longer because we don't